All right, so we are live. It is 9 a.m. in New York time or on the East Coast of the United States. And we have our second webinar of this semester with Focier Consulting and Ian Sandler as the company representative. And I assume by now you all have seen the first webinar as well as probably a webinar from the last semester. So those of you watching live or in recording, if you haven't seen the first one, you can always watch the first one, and that one focuses more on the company description. So in that webinar, we talked more about how Focier works, what the company does, the business model, the challenges, the threats, the opportunities they see. So it is a more general introduction of the company itself and its business. Today, we are only about 2 weeks away from the finish of the competition, and we would like to focus on specific questions that students have submitted to us with respect to their reports. So we have received quite a few dozens of questions related to the company and the challenge that the teams work on. And to introduce some order to this discussion, what I did is I grouped those questions by chapter. So the plan today is to go literally chapter by chapter and ask the questions that have been presented by the students so far, and then see what the company can respond to that. And hopefully this will be useful, as the answers to those questions come still, as we said, about 2 weeks before the end of the competition. So this way, if you're still either struggling with some of the issues, or perhaps have created, or finished your chapter, but still are not sure if that's what the company seeks, you will hear those answers today, and you will still have enough time to make the changes or additions to your report to make it a winning report. And so I'm going to switch now to our presenter, Ian Sandler, and I would like to start with one general question first. A number of students ask how long or how to find the balance between briefness versus detail. And the reason this question comes up all the time is because in our instructions that we gave to the students, we consistently and always say that shorter is better than more. So we almost ask them to write their reports as if it was an elevator pitch. We tell them that the company representative, like for example, in this case, Ian, will have to, or will see a lot of reports, literally dozens and sometimes even hundreds of reports. We're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of pages. And so we explain to the students that in most cases, it's very difficult for them to read even flip pages of all those reports. And normally that advice works very well, because for most of the companies, the way the challenge is structured is the companies are looking for specific observations or tips or analysis. With Focier, it's a little different, because you ask for competition, for projects, for potential customers, and it appears based on the questions that the more is better, because you want as comprehensive a review of, let's say, for example, existing projects. And so that can take pages and pages of space, especially if the students would like to propose or present names of the responsible people, contacts, description of the project. So from your client perspective, in a sense here, what would be your preference? Is more detail better here, or is it better to keep it short so you can quickly review the submissions?
Well, I think that brevity is better in the beginning for the kind of how you came to your market choice, because I think, that is more of an academic exercise, especially for X culture. So I would say that detail comes more into play when you're talking about the current market saturation. So competitors and clients is where detail is most valuable, because a lot of our initial basis for going into these countries and starting some work is really, are people going to be competing with us, and is there a client base to draw from for our research? So I think that that's where detail is the most valuable. So again, brevity leading up to your market choice, detail on the competition and clients, and then on things like company and corporation, and if there's things on banking or any of the legal structure or things like that, I think that can be brief as well, because it's something that we're going to be putting, a whole lot of research into when we are really in country and starting that up, but it's a lot longer process. And, the most value for us of these X culture reports, and they are truly valuable, is really to know more about the country than we did before in terms of, the industry. So anything relating to development and humanitarian assistance in the industry at the get-go in these reports is very important, can be more detailed.
Okay, that's a very good answer. And then as a related question, in a sense, is about the executive summary. Again, your challenge is slightly different than what we normally see, and so what normally goes in the executive summary may not necessarily be the best advice with respect to the Focier challenge. So if you were to, in a sense, wish or request what students put in that one first page where they try to summarize all the key points, what would you like there to see? I assume you wouldn't want to see the complete list again of the projects or competition or potential clients, but what would be normally the key, the most important things that you would like to see on that first page, so that your interest is spiked and then you want to read the rest of the document, or so you can get the most interesting ideas there from that one page in case you don't have the time to even read the rest?
I think broken down by advantage would be very valuable. So basically outline your country, let's say you pick Benin, and then general outline of what each advantage is. So no competition, high amount of UN donor clients that are possible, extremely low operating costs, cheap rates for enumerators and researchers. So, in all of your sections, you should essentially be coming to a few key reasons why we want to go in.
Now, the way you talked about that, it almost sounded like it would be some sort of like almost a bullet list of the key. Would that be okay?
That'd be great. That'd be great.
The way you said it, it's not even completed sentences. So just, so that makes
like a bolded word, or line, and then a very short description underneath it. So the line is just something like no local competition or international competitors, and then very quick. And then next one, high rate of NGO headquarters in capital city, as well as UN donors and influx of donor government money. Next one, something like ease of operation and, prevalence of qualified researchers, something like that. So just, short lines in bold or italicized that summed up exactly what that advantage was, maybe a few lines underneath it, but really that I can just go through and I can point to 6 or 7 bullet points that are my reasons. And I should be able to understand the entire report from those 7 advantages and then go in. Because really, I'm very interested in the negatives as well, but I should get that in the report. First, I want to know what the positives are. So just a brief list on that first page of all the advantages would be very useful. Very useful.
That's a very good advice. I think actually that same model would work very well for the executive summary for the other challenges. And again, I'm not sure if many students are watching who are working on other challenges, but it seems like a very good idea, almost a bullet list, literally a bullet list with the key words or key findings or key reasons. And so this way it would be easy to read. There is probably, I assume, no need to say things like, we believe that it would be, or based on our research, we would like to say that. Just get directly to the key. Yeah, actually, that makes perfect sense.
Get right to it. And, obviously there will be negatives, but, I hope you choose this market because of its more advantages. So,
right.
I just want to see that. And then if I see something interesting, like, zero competition in the local research scene, I'm going to want to explore a lot more in this report, see why you thought that. If you say, extremely large client base, I'm going to want to dig deeper and find out more about that.
Yeah, that's a very good advice. Yeah. Another question is, and this one actually came from an instructor, but I think it might be relevant to the students as well. So as you know, the early track was done a few days ago, and some of the instructors started already reading those reports. And we have slightly redesigned the Focier challenge this semester, and one of the small changes, but turns out an important one, was that we dropped the company description section. And the reason for that was you already know your company. There is no need to analyze or describe the history of the company, the products. Obviously, you know that. But the challenge, the unexpected challenge with that came out to be that when the instructors read the reports, in many cases, they don't have much information about the company itself. And so some of them are a little confused when they see right away the analysis of the competition. And before they before they even know what the company itself is. And so the question here is, my advice to the instructor is read the challenge itself, read those few pages where the company is described, so there is no need to put it in the students' reports. But the question is, would it be a huge sin if the students spend like half a page or maybe one first page simply describing the company, And then obviously when you will see those reports, you can skip that one page. But when the instructors read it, it may be kind of preparing the foundation for their understanding of the subsequent sections. Would that be something that may disappoint you?
No, I think that's great. I'm a big believer in redundancy, and drilling it in certain ways is actually better sometimes for learning as well. So, writing out what we do, it just emphasizes that you know what we do. So I think that can't hurt at all from a student's perspective. It can't help at all. I mean, it's great for us too, because that's a pretty good indicator that I want to read the rest of your report. If the first paragraph says, Focier sells chocolate in Europe, I'm probably not going to be as interested. So seeing that, there's a clear description of what we do and that's known by everyone, I think can only make the process smoother.
Yeah. When everybody knows that Focier actually sells educational toys, it would be silly to say that you sell chocolate. Right? Anyway, the competition section, the very first one. So there are several questions, but if I had to put them in one, it would be something like this. Would you prefer to see simply a table or some sort of a list of potential competitors or existing competitors with the description of the company, names of the contacts, addresses, and things like that? Or would you prefer it to be more analytical in a sense that the section would compare, for example, those companies to Focier, maybe talks about their advantages and disadvantages compared to you, or strengths and weaknesses compared to you? So should it be just a list of competition, or should it also include some sort of analysis or analytics of their, how they compare it to you as competitors?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because it's difficult to identify, even for us, what those competitive advantages are at first glance, without spending a lot of time. So I think that what would be really useful is seeing the list of competitors, their sectors of specialty. So maybe, not as many research firms are, very sector broad like we are. A lot of them are more, health research or conflict and security research. So seeing some of their, if possible, seeing some of these sectors that they specialize in, seeing any past clients that they have would be very useful, because that's really what we're going to base on a lot.
Past clients, okay, that's very important, yeah.
Past clients, past projects, if you have any examples. A lot of these websites, they should have this information. If you find out who the competitor is, you go on their website, you see a few past projects in that country, that's great, because I can learn the most from seeing the projects they've done to relate to, our 300 projects that we've done.
That's a very good advice, yeah.
Projects, sectors, if you wanted to, maybe a 1, 2, 3 sentence brief summary on their advantage. That could be a good exercise, I think, for everyone as well. Just, this firm has, 200 staff on the ground and is, highly versed with 30 years of health research, something like that. A short little, very, very short. I'm talking, 1 to 3 sentences. Abstract, if you will, for each one would be useful. But really, sector, I think sector, past projects, and if they have any staffing or anything like size indications, size is really useful too. If you can find things like revenue, if you can find things like staff size, that's exciting for us to look at.
And then a related question here is, again, since in other challenges or reports, students, when they talk about competition, they should actually analyze the competitive position of the company itself. So in a sense, conduct a SWOT analysis of the company. So talk about, strength, weaknesses of the company in question, and then with the reference to competition. So in the Focier challenge, we don't request students to do that. The question is, if some students wanted to do that, would that be interesting to you at all? Where they would talk about kind of, how they see based on their analysis the competitive position of Focier. Would you be interested in that?
Well, I think it would be interesting in terms of ex-culture students learning more about us, and again, understanding what we do and our strengths and weaknesses, because it makes the rest of the report stronger. I think it wouldn't be as useful for me personally in terms of its applicability for market expansion, mostly just because, well, I know our weaknesses. I'll tell you that much. So things like that. I'm familiar with, but I think that, again, it's great because it lends credence to the rest of your report. So I do think that, if you want to put it in, that's great, and there's no problem at all. It may not be something that I pay the most attention to, but it's useful and shows that you understand what we do well and what we don't. because then I am going to trust your recommendations a lot more.
One of the questions was actually specifically about the second part of the SWOT analysis of strengths and weaknesses. That part is specifically, it's fairly obvious, but then threats and opportunities. And so the logic there the student had was, what if there are some threats or opportunities that the company, the students may see, but maybe you being busy with other things may not necessarily identify in time, and either miss on great opportunities or maybe overlook some potential looming threats. And so the question here is, if they see something like that, would you be interested in seeing that in the report, or it's less relevant than the rest of the questions?
No, I think that's good. You mean like a threat or opportunity in that select country that they're choosing?
Well, in the question, they didn't say that, but I suppose, either with respect to, either the changing nature of the business or industry, or perhaps in that specific country, maybe. So I honestly don't know what the students meant in that specific question, but I assume, yes, that could relate to either a particular market or maybe the change in technology that may change how you do business. I have no idea what they have in mind.
I think, if you find a place to fit in the logical flow of the report, that's great. If it has to do with the select market they're choosing, that's very important. There should be a kind of warning section or a warning part where, none of these countries are going to be all business opportunities and, things like that. There's obviously going to be drawbacks of every single situation. And that's where I need to kind of, weigh those pros and those cons. So I certainly think that there should be definitely an emphasis on threats, reasons why it may not work, reasons why it could not be the best. You're kind of just playing devil's advocate with yourself. And I think that's, valuable on both ends as well. In terms of opportunities, those should definitely be there. That's what I want to see. So I think that's great.
Okay. Next report section, clients. Again, lots of questions about how to structure it. Would you like to see, again, a list of clients, just simply with name, description, potential clients, and whatever else they do, or would you like to see some sort of analytics there as well? And I'm not even sure what can go into that analytics, but if you would like to see more than just the names of the companies, their addresses, and the list of the things that they do, what else would you like to see there? And again, another question, I guess, related length. Again, should it be as detailed as possible, or should they focus on one or two potential most promising clients and just analyze that?
Yeah, what would be most useful here is a list and maybe the sector, because hopefully if I'm doing my job right, I should know who most of these people are, especially if they're an international client. So if they're an international client, like, I know who they are. If it's Save the Children or, a UN agency, I think that a little bit more emphasis can be played to local actors. So if there is, a purely Mozambican NGO that is focusing on economic development, there's no way I know anything about that. And that's why X-Culture is so valuable. So I think that local potential clients could have a little bit more detail about what they do. The international clients, I don't need to know, but all of their contact information or addresses, that is very useful, because one, it proves that you understand that they're in the country. A lot of the times we see something like people are suggesting, one of the large international organizations, they don't actually have a presence there, but they've done development work there. And, we know tons of people go in and out of these places, but the ones that we want to know is who is there that has the potential for sustainable long-term work for us. We want to know who's actually in that country, has a base, is developing staff that we can be providing research for and working in collaboration with. So the address is really important, if possible. So the local address, the sector that they work in, so that we can divide that. And then if it's a local actor, a little bit about them would be most useful.
Also, a number of people ask, so how do they spot a potential client? Would it be anyone who does some sort of economic development or humanitarian projects work in Africa, or are there specific things that they should look for? Because again, apparently some students say that some of the most promising or obvious clients are easy to identify. In fact, you named many of them in our previous webinar. But then they're finding all kinds of other agencies, organizations, sometimes even private companies that do that kind of work in Africa. And the question is, would all of them be of interest to you, or there is a specific criterion that they should use to say, oh, these are potentially clients, and these, even though they do something similar, may not necessarily qualify for that?
I think that development actors and humanitarian aid sector organizations will always be of use for us to know. So, the majority of our work, 99%, are with development humanitarian organizations.
Mm-hmm.
All of them, when they're implementing a project, need some kind of research in the beginning, the middle, or the end. And that's just at the base to evaluate their projects. And they need that to be a third party so that it's objective. So that's, a large percentage of our work. There's always ways for us to find other research initiatives with them, but we always know that we're going to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. So I think that any kind of development or humanitarian actor, good for us to know. Just as a reference point, when I go into a country personally in my job, let's say 3 weeks ago, or a month ago, I went to Sierra Leone and Liberia. And what I did for a month before was I put a list together of every single organization that was in the country that I could find. And then I tried to find contacts for each one. And I basically cold emailed the entire country to try and get meetings.
Just out of curiosity, so how many do you normally find, like, for example, for that specific country, for Mozambique? Yeah. So are we talking like 2, 3, or 10, 20?
Oh, 100.
100?
Yeah. So for instance, in Sierra Leone and Liberia, I found about 100 organizations in each. Then I found 3 contacts. 3 contacts for each organization. Then I emailed all of them. I get a certain response rate, and then I meet with them. You have to whittle them down.
Okay. I didn't realize it's such a big potential market.
But these countries, they have everyone. But this is a little different. So, and this is good for us to know. Sierra Leone and Freetown, the capital, is a little bit. It's a hub, just like Accra in Ghana or Nairobi in Kenya. It's where a lot of the international organizations have their headquarters or things like that. They serve as country offices and regional offices. So somewhere like Mauritania, not going to have as many organizations. But there could be up to 50 in even the most remote markets.
Wow. I didn't realize that.
And that's just counting the major international ones. That's not even going into any of the local NGOs, which certainly provide value as well. So, obviously this is my job. And so I'm constantly compiling this, but the use for X-Culture is that we're really seeing this beforehand. It gives us this idea, and then it helps add to our internal information that we're putting together. And this is now, as of 3 days ago, an entire distinct department of Focier called partnerships. So X-Culture is actually helping us work with our partnerships department to see all of the competitors and clients and lists and places that we can reach out to. So it's really valuable, and there is certainly a lot there, but it's just, kind of whittling down that list, getting as much as we can at the beginning, and then whittling it down until it's, the most useful.
Yeah. I assume probably the most useful leads would be the ones where either a student maybe knows someone in the organization, happens to be there. Yeah. And also, it's not one of the students' questions, but I'm just curious for myself. All those organizations, where does the money normally come from? First, by the country. So is it primarily from the United States or Europe, or there are other country donors? And then second, would it be from governmental budgets that they have for developing, or some sort of aid budgets? Or would it be some sort of like, private funding, or maybe some sort of small crowdfunding? Who normally provides that sort of help and support?
The majority of international development money comes from international development donor governments. So really, you can base it a lot on who colonized who in Africa. It's a lot of a kind of guilt complex, to be honest. That sounds terrible, but it really is.
Well, I guess you can also see it as an apology as well, right? So
yeah, it is. A lot of the former British colonies are receiving money from DFID, the British Development Agency. The U.S. government, although we didn't colonize, we give a lot of money to Liberia, which was, started by former free slaves from America. As well, you can think of it a little bit in terms of political interest as well. So, we are creating alliances and buffer zones. It's, international aid, it's a huge business. U.S. aid gives over $16 billion a year, and the majority of that goes to Africa. So all of this money is stabilizing certain governments and certain countries that we're interested in working with, resources, as well as what, in terms of humanitarian assistance, which countries need it the most. So you can kind of see which country is receiving from where based on their prior ties, but a lot of it is coming from government donors. So EU, the DFID or British, the American US aid, a little bit Canadian, and some of that is coming down from individual country governments, but for the most part, not really.
And also, just again, out of curiosity, so from the international business perspective, Africa seems to be turning into what China was in the 90s and the 2000s. So China used to be, on the one hand, a cheap labor country, on the other hand, a very promising developing market as a market, but also as an outsourcing hub. And so now it seems like Africa is becoming that. So Africa still has lots of people, untapped labor potential at a low price, at the same time, huge natural resources, and then a huge potentially customer base. And so my question here is, with all that investment from China, from developed countries, so-called, into Africa, how is it impacting the business of kind of humanitarian aid? And then also, in your personal opinion, do you think that there will be more help from the private organizations going and establishing businesses there, or will it be more in the form of help from governments, for example, or international organizations? So which of those will do more good for the continent?
I'm always in favor of private sector development. I think that private sector development in contrast to nonprofits and NGOs, a lot of that is grant money, in which case we never really know where the money goes. If you look at Afghanistan, for example, tens of billions of dollars just wasted because money was given out, no idea where it went. When you're a private sector company, you're accountable to the people you're receiving money from. You're accountable to your employees, your board of directors, a lot of things like that. The money has to be very carefully scrutinized. So I think that's great. In terms of the potential in Africa, to think of it, there's 54 unique markets that are completely different. While they work, with different ones, they're really massive growing markets. And if you look at maybe 3-4 years ago, the fastest growing market in the world was Ghana. So, it has an extremely talented young workforce. It has a lot of opportunities for natural resources and technology. It's booming. But what I think the best thing that the international community can bring is that kind of synergy and collaboration. So what's best is noticing that a lot of these local companies in all these various sectors are extremely qualified at the things that they do. And they know the country like no one else. You can't expect to come into Mozambique and tell them how to fish, because I guarantee you they can fish better. So what you have to do is, kind of understand what your strengths are as an international firm and how you can complement some of these local firms. And that's kind of the thing we do at Focier as well. We understand that local researchers in these countries are always going to be able to access places and know the place way better than we ever will. So how can we bring, our kind of education when it comes to monitoring and evaluation, our technical and analysis skills, and complement that with a local population skills and research? So I think that the same goes for international business, is recognizing all the opportunity that is there. Africa is not a continent that is 600 years behind. It is very much on the forefront in everything. And it's just recognizing how we can see that and add to it, and not reinvent the wheel every time we work with someone in an African country.
Yeah. Oh, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. Next question or next section is the existing projects. And most of the questions are very similar to the previous two. Would you like to see a list? Would you like to see the names, the budgets and all that stuff? Or do you want some sort of analysis of that? And so I would like just to ask anything specific that you would like to see in that section, other than just the list of the potential ongoing projects or future projects with the description of the projects, or something else should go into that section?
I think that we should be able to get a lot of information from the title. Development projects are usually unnecessarily wordy and very descriptive. So when you're saying it's the Strengthening Free and Independent Media Project in South Sudan, I probably get, what it's about. So I think that the project name, who is doing it, who is implementing it, and who is funding it is very important. So let's say it's the Strengthening Free and Independent Media in South Sudan project. It's implemented by an organization called Internews, and they're receiving money to do the project from USAID, the American government. So those are the two most useful things. Possibly a source on where you found that project. So if I really am interested, I can follow up. If you got it from the company website, the donor website, something like that would be good, so I can follow up. But really just a project list. I personally don't need a lot of analysis on it. But the other useful thing, if you can find it, is the duration. So when it started and when it ended. So again, I know when it started and I know how long it is and I know at what point it is in its project. I can then reach out to that person because I know that they're going to need a midterm evaluation, or I know their project is closing out in, early April of 2016. So I reach out to them in March and I say, hey, I know your project's closing. You will potentially need a final evaluation of this project. How can we possibly collaborate? So I think that duration is very important.
So did I understand that correctly? You want more in terms of the list of the projects, but less in terms of the description of each project individually, because you probably would understand what that is once you see the main scope of the idea.
Yes. Yes. I think so.
Okay. Next one, a market description. Again, this one is a little tricky, and we've received a number of questions. So the huge advantage of the Focier challenge is that you already have a specific list of questions you want to be answered. Like, for example, languages spoken, regions, culture, religion, transportation, all that stuff. So in most of the challenges provided by the other companies, they just say, give us something about the market, and that is a little too vague. But still, there is a kind of trade-off here between more versus, in a sense, useful. And so we obviously talk to the students and almost forbid them, because in the past we've seen situations where students literally would go to like a Wikipedia page of the country and literally dump everything and anything they can find on the country, which seems like a lot of research, but at the same time it's not very useful, because much of that stuff is general knowledge. Much of that stuff is probably things that you already know. And so the question here is, how can they make this section most useful for you? And what would be the key, most interesting things that you would like to see? Again, how deep, how much detail should they provide to provide that balance of, on the one hand, sufficient detail, on the other hand, focus on the specific points that you may find relevant and interesting, and potentially things that you didn't know before or didn't know that you should pay attention to?
Sure. I think that the majority of market description in terms of the history or something like that of the country is largely not as much of use. I think like languages, things like that, population, that's, useful, but can be summed up pretty quickly. The general operating environment, I'm not sure either of us will get from a report. I'm not sure it's going to be possible to write as in it's an easy place to do business, or it's hospitable to foreigners, something like that. I think we're all kind of spitballing there until we can get into the place and see it. So a market description, what's useful is just kind of getting basic statistics about a country that I can read through the report and check out, instead of, sure, I may go to a Wikipedia page and look up the population and the capital and the languages and things like that, but I won't need to if you put it in the report in a succinct, clearly presented way. And that should lead to the rest of the report. So, ideally, this whole report is a logical flow of providing me all the information on the country and all the advantages. And I should know a lot about this country in terms of just the country itself, as well as its potential for research and the development sector by the end of the report. So a little information on the market, again, brief in terms of, useful things that I would want to know are something like population, major cities, regions, if it's split up into 14 districts or something like that. The biggest problems in the country, is useful. If it's undergoing some kind of civil war, if slavery is a major issue, if it's dealing with Ebola or a large disease crisis, these are all things. So I think, actually problems are very useful. Unfortunately, problems are sometimes where research, well, not unfortunately, problems are where research comes into hand the most. We need to know about the place. So I think if something is going through a major epidemic, or there's a major issue of civil instability, I will then be able to piece together, and so will you, that the funding will come to stop this, implementing partners will come to try and solve it, and we will come to provide information for these people to actually do this great development work.
In fact, problems things that you're trying to fix, and so obviously you would like to know about them.
Yeah, I think that would be useful.
Operating cost, and I think my question would relate both to the section on the operating cost as well as the company description. What students should understand is that it is very difficult for the company to read all those reports. And one thing that we do here essentially starting this semester, we are trying to what we call meta-analyze your responses. And so, for example, when we talk about the operating cost, let's say, how much would it cost to, let's say, hire a vehicle for one day? What the information that you provide, we will then try to, in a sense, average out. And so, for example, let's say there are 50 teams working on the challenge, and they give us, let's say 10 of them chose the specific market. And so one says that it will cost, let's say, $50 a day to hire a car. Another one says it's $100 a day, and so on and so on. So we'll get some sort of an average. And so the hope is that the overall average will be somewhat informative. So I guess from our perspective is try to be as standardized as possible and try to provide those key numbers in a as visible format as possible. So literally, transportation cost number, hotel or lodging number, and things like that. But then again, going back to you, Ian, anything specific that you would like to see in this section, and again, the format in which you would like this information to be presented. From what I hear so far, again, you don't care so much about the literary style. You would like it to be as concise, maybe even in the form of a bullet list or a table. So do you understand that correctly? Is that how you would like to see it, or?
Absolutely. I was just mentioning before, you sent me this summary of rates for different people. That's extremely useful. Of course, we're going to have to validate these, but it's a starting point for us because we're all at the same page. Again, Africa has 54 unique countries, and we certainly do not know the vast majority of them as in depth as we know the markets that we operate in currently. So if I am preparing a proposal for a country, let's say Mali, but I don't know Mali very well. Maybe there's no one in our company who has a lot of experience in Mali. Being able to draw from some of these rates provided, it's a good basis for us. So I would like to know all these rates are fantastic, but I'd like to know your source so I can follow up on them and check, because that'll be a great base for in terms of use. Is I look at this rate and I can get a good feel of if it's ridiculous or if it's if it looks standard, and then I'm going to follow up on that source and then go, oh, okay, they got that from a pretty reputable place that I may have not been able to find. And then I can go from there, and that's easy. So rates like that, those can just be straight table based as long as I kind of have somewhere that I can be pointed in the right direction afterwards.
So then for the students, again, I would like to reemphasize one more time, in your weekly surveys, we didn't ask you to provide the sources, we just asked you to provide a concise summary. But in the final report that you will be submitting in a few weeks, as you just heard from Ian's answer, he would like to see the sources. So your sources must be credible, and you must show where you got that information, that you didn't just made it up, but it's actually based on some reasonable and trustworthy research.
Yeah, and even, however, I don't know how you guys prefer, but footnotes or bibliography or any kind of thing like that I can, reference. It doesn't have to be like a sentence descriptor as in like I found this in this place. Just any kind of bibliography or footnotes is just great for me to be able to locate easily.
Again, for you, in the instructions at the end of the challenge description, you have a link to what we call APA 6 reference style. That's the American Psychological Association. You will see there both links to samples, how you can source reference sources, as well as links to articles that talk about it in more detail. And I strongly encourage you to spend some time with that, because not only it will help you to write this particular report, but again, in the future, no matter what kind of job you do, both for school, but then for a job, you will have to cite your sources in any report you provide and prepare. And learning how to do it correctly will help you in the future. So even if it may take you 20, 30 minutes to research that specific skill now, or that specific tool or method now, it will definitely be some of the best 30 minutes of your time ever spent, because it will pay off later on, even after you're done with this particular project. So next question related to staffing. And again, that's where people, we got a lot of questions about that. How exactly, so on the one hand, the question is extremely clear. So try to perhaps even, explain how to recruit candidates, all that stuff. So that is understood. But then we also have, if you can compile a database of potential candidates, then provide their name, degrees, and stuff like that. And so many students would like to compile that sort of a database, but they're just not sure how to go about that. And so the questions that we receive are, should we just go to LinkedIn and try to identify potential candidates by searching by country and the skills? Should we go to local newspapers and try to see if there are any ads there? So what kind of steps would you prefer them to take, in a sense, or in a case when students are ready to do as much as you want them to do, they just don't know what to do? So what would be your preference in terms of their specific actions for finding and compiling that sort of a database of potential candidates?
So I think that this section is probably one of the more difficult ones, and maybe one that we might consider actually removing in the next iteration, just in terms of it's hard to find online, especially in this report writing context, qualified candidates either locally or internationally. It's something that we struggle with as a company, without a full-time recruiter. So we have what's called a consultant roster on our website. It's basically, if you are a consultant wanting to work with Focier, you submit your resume, and if we have a project in the future that matches your skill set, we will then reach out to you. So right now, potentially, this is something as finding consultants that we could possibly add to this roster. But in terms of, a description of how to locate staff, I'm not sure that's as useful. I mean, we look at it in two ways. If we're starting an office in a country, then we're starting with a very small staff, as in 1 or 2 people, 1 international staff, and then a few local staff researchers. So that's, we wouldn't really need, any kind of steps, and they will make, inways with the universities and things like that to recruit people. If it's with a country that we're looking to do one-off work in, from our regional hub kind of offices, then it's more useful to have certain staffing that we could pick up quick if we had to go into a country for just a month or 3 weeks and then leave. So to be honest, I wouldn't put as much effort into this section. I think that it's not as valuable in terms of it's just going to take a really long time, and it's a long time down the way. We know that we're going to be able to find young, eager potential researchers everywhere that we go locally. And Forcier's specialty is our emphasis on capacity building. We have the curricula and the people that are, used to doing this kind of training that we can, shape interested people into researchers. In terms of international consultants, sure, LinkedIn is a great tool if there's, a few people that you see that highly specialize in monitoring and evaluation in Mali, and then the sector that they focus in or something like that. But again, I wouldn't focus too much on this section, and I think that we'll probably revise it going forward, listening to some of this and as well as myself going over the proposal.
Okay. Last question or last section is any other suggestions? I suppose this one's clear. If you have any other suggestions, or if you spotted some interesting either trends or tendencies or problems, that's where you will talk about that. But still, Ian, for you, the question would be, anything that you potentially wish to see in this section, or some ideas or hints what could go into this section?
In the suggestion section?
Yeah, so other suggestions. So here we just basically said in the description or instructions, any other suggestions for improving Forcier's either business model or anything else that you think the company should know that we didn't touch upon in the specific previous sections. So
yeah,
you might.
I would use this section to try and be a little creative, try and use some more innovative approaches. You've just done all of this research on all the clients and all the opportunities that are there, but a lot of our job is coming up with opportunities. Most of the time I'm talking to people who know nothing about research, who want nothing to do with research. It's an afterthought. We have to try and sell them on why research is so important and why it can contribute to the projects that you're already working on. So I think this section is a great opportunity, maybe something we can iron out a little bit more in future iterations, but a section on really, you've looked at some of these things. Now, propose something weird that we maybe didn't think about. You've seen that coffee is grown in this location, but there aren't a lot of locally sourced coffee vendors. Someone needs to kind of do that feasibility study on if international clients would be willing to buy it. And there's a huge, kind of research component there that can be done. So based on all this, something crazy you can kind of come up with that might be related to research in this country be useful. Yeah, I think, as well as maybe a little bit more focus on the private sector is something that we don't look at a lot. It's not the majority of our work, but if you see that potential while doing your research and you didn't feel it was relevant in other sections, we'd love to see it here.
Yeah, so this is your opportunity to shine. So this is something that where you have all the freedom and can really differentiate your answer from that of the other teams.
And for example, while it wasn't maybe entirely feasible, in a past X-Culture project, it was actually the winning one in Mozambique last semester. the team suggested working with Starbucks in the country. And, while Mozambique maybe is not the best market for Starbucks, it was a fantastic answer just in terms of kind of thinking creatively, showing something different, understanding what we do and how we could apply it somewhere totally weird. You're never going to lose points on either our value side, I think, or the X culture side on showing that you understand it, but proposing something kind of innovative and new. So I liked it.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. And then, so one quick comment, I keep receiving questions about the things that we already discussed. Like, for example, I see Jessica here is asking about the executive summary, a number of other students. So those of you who joined later, please watch the recording. So once the session is over, you can use the same YouTube link to see the whole session recorded in a 1 hour or whatever, 45-minute chunk. And so we did talk about those things. So one of the reasons I didn't ask all of the questions is because many of them had been addressed earlier. So, and the second or last question, I guess, second comment, last question, this one relates to all the sections in a sense. And so that is, it seems like many students are eager to provide some very tangible value to please you with some sort of specific business leads, or so give you something that you can take right away and basically have a contract based on that. And so the question is, what could that be? For other companies, it's very simple. So they usually have a physical product. And so many teams find potential distributors or retailers, and they literally say, well, this store wants to buy a container of your, let's say, for example, shoes, and they would like to start selling them. And so they literally bring almost like a business offer or contract in hand. What could that be for Focier? What can students bring you where you will say, oh, that's pretty much a contract. Yeah, that's a wonderful lead. So what would that be where you will jump and say, yes, this is basically a deal?
Well, I would say first, if you could do that entirely, don't tell me, because I will lose my job, because I have definitely not been able to do that. So I would say it's going to be difficult to secure a contract just based on desk research and things like that, as well as kind of just knowing the intricacies of the country, very well. So that's really hard. I think that the closest thing would be providing all the background information. So going through the process is, okay, I've located a client. I've located their need for research. Maybe, they've actually put out a call for a research initiative, something like that. Maybe that their project is ending and they're going to need research at the end. If you find that, and you also find me the contact information for that person, so this is the business development representative, or actually more likely it's a program officer or a monitoring and evaluation specialist or a research manager, something like that. You find me their contact info, their email, and you provide me all this background. I can then reach out to them with something very clear and say, listen, I see your needs for this, this, and this. Here's our company. That's how the conversation will get started, and that's what will lead to a contract. Yeah.
And I even assume that if they have a really good lead, like they know the project is about to be over and they need that kind of sort of advice, I even suspect, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I suspect it would be probably wiser to approach Ian first and then ask Ian to make that contact, because he knows what to say in those cases. He has all the information. So because if the initial contact is either by someone who may not know all the things or is not done right, it may actually do potentially harm to the lead, right?
Yeah. I mean, we only really get one shot at a lot of these when we don't know. We are the little guy. So coming into a lot of these organizations, these are massive behemoths, used to dealing with consultants and firms and individual researchers from all over the world. So we only really have one shot to sell ourselves quick and get them kind of hooked that we can then work on something. It's never a let's have this conversation, boom, it's sold. It's let's have this conversation. Let me write a full 20-page detailed proposal. They're going to give us feedback. We're going to come back and forth. So giving us the background info and then the connection is extremely useful and saves me weeks and weeks of time. So I think that's the best way.
And I assume if you do bring that sort of information, that opportunity, even though the initial contact may be done by Focier directly, I'm sure they will try to keep you in the loop in some way. And especially if you know the people personally or something like that, you will not be left out. So it's just important that that initial contact is done right. Anyway, It's been almost an hour, and Ian asked, he has another meeting, so he needs to leave a little earlier. So we're going to stop here. As before, if you have any questions, if there are questions that I didn't see or didn't answer, or if you have some that you just thought of now, email them to me and we will forward them to Ian. So we will keep compiling our frequently asked questions database. But for the live session, we're going to stop here. Thank you so much, Ian. Truly appreciate your help. I know you've had a lot of travel lately and probably need to catch up on things. And yeah, thank you so much for your support and time.
Absolutely. Always great to talk. Looking forward to the next one.
Thank you so much.